We are very happy to have you. Her presentation is called Framing the Refugee Hunter, Gender and Nationalist Perspectives on Border Vigilance in Bulgaria. The floor is yours, Kristina.
Thank you very much, Martin. Can you hear me okay? Great. Let me just share my PowerPoint presentation. And please let me know if you can can you see my?
Yes, yeah. It looks good.
Can you see it? Oh, perfect. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and to present my research. I will discuss border vigilance in Bulgaria. I will begin by briefly discussing the context in which border vigilance emerged, and then I will move forward to discuss the refugee hunter and what I describe as external bordering. And then I will move forward to discuss another type of border vigilance, which is everyday bordering or everyday vigilance. And I suggest that the bordering or the border vigilance is produced via a victimhood protection discourse. So,
Kristina, sorry to interrupt, but your presentation is now not on, let's say, presentation mode. So we see it, but it's in a smaller screen. So if you...
Not in full screen, but anyway,
yeah.
Yeah, now it's better.
Is
yes,
that it?
Perfect. Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Great. So border vigilance, Vigilantes in Bulgaria emerged as a direct response to the European migration crisis, as we've already discussed, as already was mentioned. Since 2013, the number of people crossing the border between Turkey and Bulgaria increased, and refugee camps became a permanent feature of the landscape, usually placed around border regions. In 2013, the camps, the tents were erected not far away from the town center of Harmanli. There was no sanitation, as you can see on the photo. It was just newly built. Soon after, in 2014, the center became a center for temporary reception, and in 2015, it became a registration reception center of Harmanli, as it is until today. Newcomers coming to the refugee camp in Harmanli would usually cross the so-called green border between Turkey and Bulgaria. They would often be driven by what is known as local carriers or traffickers, or alternatively by border police to the camp, where they would wait there to apply for asylum. It is in this context of constructing refugee camps around the Bulgarian-Turkish border, that border vigilance in Bulgaria emerged. The most emblematic expression of border vigilance in Bulgaria has been the phenomenon of refugee hunting. And the figure who describes himself as a refugee hunter is the most emblematic figure is Dinku Valev. He is a white man in his 30s, a businessman who goes either by himself or with a group of his friends to patrol the green border, where there isn't really a fence, or you just go to patrol with all-terrain vehicles. And he'd usually, the groups that he goes would usually be either dressed in black or with military clothing. And while they don't usually wear firearms, they don't have firearms, their hunting is of human beings. The practices that they develop is to go and capture people who cross the border. As one of the photos here illustrates, they would just kind of perform public arrests of these people. They would place them on the ground, and they would either search them or kind of investigate them, and sometimes hand them over to border police. Now, these practices have been have received wide popular support. The Prime Minister of Bulgaria, Boyko Borisov, thanked volunteers such as Dinko Falev, who patrol the border, and for their thanked them for their cooperation. We also know that in 2016, Bulgarian national television conducted a poll survey, which is something they usually do, and around 84% of the population supported vigilantes, and the idea that the vigilantes, such as Dinko Velev, need to receive government support for their actions. And only 16% said that they shouldn't. Of the people who voted said that they shouldn't. First name became a noun. So Dinkovci is a new word that emerged in Bulgaria, and it refers to people who are self-sacrifice themselves, who patrol the border, who are volunteers, and this is generally perceived positively. In fact, the refugee hunter Dinko Velev, he is imagined as a modern day, as a national hero. When I went to my fieldwork in Harmanli, almost everyone that I spoke with expressed a degree of approval, endorsement, support towards the practices of border vigilance, of these border patrols that take place. One thing that's perhaps interesting to explore is that the discourse through which this refugee hunter identity and an agency becomes realized is through a discourse of victimhood and protection. So this kind of relationship. Dinko constructs the Bulgarian community as a victim of invaders, those people who obviously he can see crossing the border. So that's, for him, it's illegal. It's an invasion. It illustrates the failure of the state to protect the national community. Therefore, we collectively are a victim. And the way that he portrays that is, he would, with his border patrols, he would often kind of commemorate his hunts via his a smartphone, and he would publicize this on social media. So how he captures them and how he searches them, this kind of protection that he performs is in the regulation to the victimhood that is perceived by the invaders, by the imagined invaders. The border patrols that we see on the border are mainly conducted by men, such as the and there is a strong hyper-masculine presence of the national hero. And we see also on one of the photos how he is topless and without riding a horse, without the saddle. He often has a cross tattooed across his heart, and which is often visible through his widely open shirt in photos that he publicizes. So there is, and again here the photos behind him are a tank. Allegedly now he has a helicopter to patrol, and all of this is part of this one man who this kind of refugee hunter who patrols the border. Now, this is border vigilance, which takes place exactly on the border between Turkey and Bulgaria. And in my experience, from my field work, there is this kind of border vigilance has another aspect in Bulgaria, which is internal bordering. So in addition to this external border patrolling, we can observe another type. So this is what could be seen as public investigations into everyday life, into appearances, so the way people look, the way the bodies of people who are in the public spaces now in Harmanli and this border town, the way people look, the way people interact with one another. So if there are a group of men who work together, that's considered a threat or something that needs to be investigated, that needs to be further scrutinized. Other things such as people from the refugee camp withdrawing cash is from an ATM would be considered again practices of suspicion, a reason for suspicion. So we see that everyday behavior in public spaces, in the park, in the supermarket, they become reason for investigations of locals and for suspicion. And I suggest that this is also part of vigilance that is similar in a way to the external bordering, only that it happens internally. As I already mentioned, Dinkovci, this name has penetrated the everyday life of Bulgarians. So that's another kind of example that of how accepted bordering is. So the internal bordering for following Yuval Davis is practices where the national border is placed into everyday interactions in such a ways that it shapes the right to belong or limits the right to belong within the camp, within the refugee camp in family, or in the public spaces. In my field work, in practices of internal bordering can be seen as anti-refugee protests. So we know already from the literature in Europe that after the migration crisis or alongside the migration crisis, new kind of anti-refugee or anti-migration protests emerged. From my fieldwork, I could identify that some of these organizers of the anti-refugee protests, who are not parties, far-right parties, are actually have a kind of vigilant identity and agency. So I've spoken with 3 women aged between 35 and 55 who organized 5 protests against 5 protests overall in Harmanli. What's very interesting about this group, about these women, is that they have a very, so first of all, they're women, and they have a very important, very kind of comfortable social standing One is a teacher, another is a lawyer, and another is a town hall council advisor. They all self-identified as organizers of protests against the way immigration is managed. And two of these women self-identify as public figures. Another two of them organized a new initiative committee, so-called Initiative Committee for Harmony in 2013, which is in direct response to the construction of the refugee camp. And the work of this initiative committee is to collect this kind of suspicious information of people from the camp in their everyday life. So the posts on their Facebook group, for example, would illustrate the way things, the everyday life in Harmony being scrutinized and interpreted, reinterpreted. One of the women describes her agency and her work in the following extract, and I will read it out loud, and then I will interpret it a little bit further after that. So one of the women, her name is Svetlana Nikolova, and she identifies as a public figure. So in an interview, she says, "Until now, I have no response from the Ministry of Health. So in my capacity as a journalist and a public figure, I have undertaken my own investigation. For only 30 meters from the refugee center, I came across 16 cases of parasitic tropical disease, which is not known in Bulgaria. It is a skin leishmaniasis, known as tropical ulcer, Alevska pimple, white leprosy, etc. They also call it the evil of Aleppo. In the scope of 30 minutes, I stopped the people coming out of the registration reception center, Harmony, with the question if there is scabies in the camp, for which I have evidence that it is ubiquitous. In addition to this confirmed, the truth about the bizarre, terrible wounds on the legs and hands of migrants came out. Every third migrant I met said he had these wounds, most of who allowed me to photograph them. Immediately afterwards, I sent the photos to a renowned specialist, an icon in parasitic and tropical disease in Bulgaria, Associate Professor Dr. Dimitar Vuchev, MD, who confirmed that this is skin leishmaniosis." So what is there? In this extract, we see how Svetlana, or this woman, conceptualizes herself. So in addition to seeing herself as a public figure, she is waiting, she demands a response from the Bulgarian state, here the Ministry of Health, on the life and on the healthcare of people who live in the camp, which is a very interesting claim and demand. And because she does not receive such information, she feels justified to take her own investigation. And in fact, this is okay, I think I've missed it. Yeah, excuse me, to take her own investigation. So with what she does is she stands outside of the camp and she photographs people, and she constructs an exotic contagious disease. And this is very interesting because it's not a care for the people in the camp. The problem that she's trying to construct is that there is a danger for the local community. Who would be exposed to this disease that is not known. And this is a photo which for me really represents this investigation that she has conducted. So the woman who is holding the textbook is this private investigator who claims that she has authority and she knows she could diagnose people, and people who are sitting, the three people who are sitting on the table who have the microphones pointed towards them are in fact doctors who have been in the camp, who have examined the people, and who claim, which was later proven as well, that there is no such disease existing. In fact, only the thing that came out is that people in the camp really needed medical care, but there wasn't any exotic, any disease that was present. And still, despite this finding, despite these claims from the authority, she is not convinced. And she argues, as we see in that photo, where she has presented all the photographs on the table of skin irritations, which she claims are a particular disease.
Kristina, could you move slowly to the conclusion, because you have
thank you. Sorry.
really
Yes.
Only 1 minute left.
Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome.
So we see that this is this kind of revelation and the impact of this investigation has led to one of the protests that she had led together in alliance here with also with a far-right organization, and protest called for migrants to not be seen in the public spaces, and to so that they don't spread around these kind of exotic diseases. This was the reasons of the protest, which only emerged because of the investigation of this woman. And other similar investigations have been conducted by the other women that I've spoken with, who themselves also further organized protests, such as a protest for the mothers, the protest of the mothers in Harmony. The outcome of this protest specifically was that the refugee camp was locked down because even though the state knew that there was no exotic disease, because of that pressure of the protest, the camp was locked down. And it had serious repercussions for the care, for the way the community perceived the camp, and that the fact that actually there was some reason for suspicion if they at the end closed it. So in conclusion, I'll just restate my main points, that border vigilance in Bulgaria emerged in 2013. Vigilance on the external border is manifested in refugee hunting, and vigilance as internal bordering is conceptualized as protesting against the refugee camp or searching for information. And both the internal and the external border vigilance is produced through a victimhood protection discourse. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kristina, for a really fascinating continuation of some of the discussions we've been having, but also extending them to other domains. So I'm very already looking forward to the discussion. But first, we have two more presentations. The next presentation is by Vincenzo Scalia, who's a reader in criminology at the University of Winchester. Vincenzo has taught criminology in Bologna and Roma and Palermo, amongst other places. And he has been doing research, or at least writing and thinking about many places, including also Mexico and Argentina. And he has published both on prisons, juvenile deviance, organized crime, and policing. We're looking forward to your presentation. Let me remind you that I'll give you 15 minutes, and then I'll write you a chat image, or a chat message, sorry, to ask you to come to the conclusion. And before that, the floor is entirely yours, Vincenzo.
Hello, thanks, Martin. Thanks, everybody, for being here with me. I will adopt the old way, because I understood that it was not compulsory to do the PowerPoint slides, so I decided not to do them. And so I decided, to propose this paper because I felt stimulated by Vigilantism and reflected upon the fact that Cosa Nostra, or the Sicilian Mafia, bases a good deal of its power, a good deal of its consent among local population precisely on vigilantism. I mean, it might sound weird. Why? Because when we think of mafia, we think of a structured paramilitary, very efficient machine, organization that is parallel to that of the state. And also, if we look back at the roots of Cosa Nostra in Sicily, unlike the different Italian criminal organization, Cosa Nostra started out as a legal organization because the Sicilian mafia developed for controlling the labor market, organizing the production, and granting security of Sicilian land estates, latifundia. So what might vigilantism as to do? What does it get to do? Well, there are different dimensions because indeed, if we want, Gramsci told us about hegemony, force, and consent. So Cosa Nostra managed to deliver some services on behalf of the population, which could enable it to build its consent. And in particular, in order to build my topic, my argument, I will rely on two major authors. One is Regina Bateson, who dwells upon what Norberto Bobbio had said about the power of mafia. That is a power that is extra legal, that runs parallel, sometimes supplants, overlaps the power of the state, pursuing legal aims through illegal means. The other concept I would like to rely upon is that provided by Les Johnston, who is the one who proposed the concept of vigilantism in the British Journal of Criminology in 1996. And one of the dimensions provided by Les Johnston is precisely that of social control. That is, social control as a mean to sort of preventing violation of the established social order, not only formal social order, but more broadly normative social order. A social order relies on mores, on folkways. And this is precisely what happens to these two cases that I decided to propose you to deliver in order to analyze how Cosa Nostra delivers vigilantism. So there is the methodological warning that I'm giving you. So how did I get to know about this case? Well, one case is through a social worker in Palermo, and the other case, it was just through my barber shop. And in both cases, I managed to have first-hand interviews, discussion with people involved in these cases, either directly or indirectly as neighbors. And I could sort of have my way to reconstruct the case. So we will see the first case. The first case is located in Ballarò. Ballarò is a traditional market of Palermo. Palermo has three historical markets dating back to the Arab domination. Well, no, the second to the French domination. So Capo and Ballarò are Arabs. The Bucceria dates back to the French 13th century. And this case is set in Ballarò. You had this case of this guy, and this guy is an LGBTQ person. His father left home when he was a child, and he grew up. He was the only son of seven offsprings. So he had 6 sisters. He had, and he grew up with his mom, with his sisters, with his sons, and basically said, well, I learned to behave like them. I started aping them, and sooner than later, as soon as he grew up, he also started disguising himself first, and then he decided to act as a transsex, not really, never changing sex, and he started working as a sex worker, and everybody in the neighborhood knew about him. So you might think that this is odd because it goes against the traditional values that the mafia members are sexist, and indeed they are. That the neighborhood is made up with sexist people oriented through traditional values, to the respect of traditional values. But here there is something different. I mean, because everybody's saying, well, no, he was respectful. He earned his living without doing any harm to anybody. And he was sort of the real breadwinners, because all his families, his sisters, his mother work as housemates, underpaid job. And he said, I earn more than all of them together. And then you had these new neighbors who break the order. This guy who started insulting him, provoking him. And there's no other way for him but to tell them to stop it. Neighbors tell them, warn them. And then suddenly one day, these two guys were the children of a family living there are just badly beaten. And the whole family is forced to leave the place. So here it's strange, because you might find it odd that Cosa Nostra defends a transsexual. I mean, as a person holding a market stall told me, that was a sort of a source of money. 15 people lived off his work, so they could not behave like that. And then again, there is the aspect that it's not something that Cosa Nostra imposes. They sort of interpret the dominating moods of the neighborhood. And then let's move on to the second case. The second case is about, again, a classic love affair developing in Passo di Rigano. Passo di Rigano was a former borgata, or borough of Palermo, then turning into a peripheral area. And there was this girl who was doing well at school, and then she's approached by this guy, and this guy just goes after her at school, waits for her at school, and he scares her friends away and say, no, she is only mine. And despite the fact she's attending school, she's doing well, her parents are proud of her, she accepts, let's say, the proposal of this boy of K, and gets pregnant from her. But then once she gets pregnant, the boy holds back, saying, no, I'm no more interested in this. I'm no more interested. I haven't got a job. It was just a mistake. You can have abortion. And the family is really upset, because not only she's no more attending school, but they are against abortion. They don't know what to do. They feel shame. And the whole neighbor shows solidarity to this girl. And then C's mother is asked by the grocer if there is something he can do about them. And in a while, Kay is called by the local mafia bosses, is told off, he's got some bruises, as the girl says, and then he's hired and she marries her, and is told by the mafia boss, then if you haven't got a job, you shouldn't have got her pregnant. So what could we think? Why vigilantism? Well, basically, again, social control and extra legal power. Cosa Nostra makes sure that social order is make sure that is maintained, remains there. But why do they do it? Why do they do it? This is the question we should wonder about. After all, it's not a matter of strike for word values, because in the first case, they acted on behalf of a transex that is as far away as we can have from their values. And more than this, secondly, they are not required to intervene. They ask if they can do something in the second case. In the first case, we don't know if someone talks to them. Apparently, nobody went to talk to any member of Cosa Nostra. It was themselves who decided to intervene. So what is the point? Well, probably the point is that the mafioso operates in a domain that relies upon social mores, some specific respected rules, either for mostly informal rules, because of course they don't follow legal rules. Of course, Cosa Nostra doesn't want to deal with the police, and this is precisely the point. I mean, in both cases, both in the case of the transex and in the case of these two families, if of this boy and a girl, there is the problem that such matters are dealt with on a family base. How are they dealt with? Violently. Usually you try to accommodate the problem. Informally, we talk to each other. Then the second stage is maybe I call someone we both trust, who is not necessarily a mafia member, and that is the end of it. The third stage is the violent escalation. We start beating at each other, stabbing at each other, maybe shooting at each other. Okay, but what is the outcome of this? The outcome of this is that the police starts patrolling the territory as to intervene if a violent thing happens openly, publicly. And this is something that Cosa Nostra doesn't want. They don't want police forces to interfere, to control the territory. So basically, there is a sort of implicit agreement in a way with police forces. You don't intervene, you don't patrol the territory, but in change, we grant the order to be maintained. We grant the escalation. But so here's the paradox. Okay, we interpretate what happens around the neighborhoods. We interpretate what is the moods of the population, and we mediate between conflicts. We even can use the force. Why do we do this? Not on the behalf of the neighborhoods, not on the behalf of society. They are doing it on their behalf, just because if formal legalities, that is the legality by the state, the legality by police intervenes, it will be the patrol of the territory, and then the interest, the business, the control, the paramilitary control of the territory by Cosa Nostra to be in trouble, both because they might see about some other illegal business, and because if the police intervene, Cosa Nostra might lose the consent among the local population. So this vigilantism is apparently performed on behalf of the weakest, of the poor, the poorest ones, the ones who were disappointed by what had happened to them. But no, it is just on behalf of themselves, on behalf of their business. We could call it as instrumental vigilantism in a way. An instrumental vigilantism that, anyway, can relies on the necessity, on the need by Cosa Nostra to build a consent at large. Yeah, I hope I wasn't too confusing. And thanks very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Vincenzo. As far as I'm concerned, you were not at all confusing. So thank you very much for this clear presentation, and also for your very beautiful sort of ethnographic insights. These examples really speak to our imagination. So thank you very much. Then we move to the third presentation of this panel. Third presenter is Anna Ivasiuc. Anna is a social anthropologist and a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Conflict Studies at the Philipps University of Marburg in Germany. And she's currently carrying out a comparative study of practices of informal policing bordering on vigilantism in Germany and in the Netherlands. And her project is called The Rise of Informal Policing in Europe, Security Space State, which is funded by the Gerda Henkel Foundation. We are very happy to have you, Anna. So I'm not sure if you want to share a PowerPoint, but in any case, as with the other presenters, I'll give you a notice by chat if your 15 minutes are up, and looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for organizing this absolutely fascinating workshop. I am going to share my screen. Let me start the slideshow. There we go. So let me start just by telling you in a couple of sentences how I got to study the topic of what I call informal policing, which encompasses a little bit more than just, going towards violence kind of vigilantism. Between 2014 and 2017, during my postdoctoral research project, I've conducted research on the securitization of the Roma in Italy. So more specifically on how the Roma are constructed and governed as a threat on multiple levels in the eastern periphery of Rome. And it is in this context particularly that I encountered the phenomenon of neighborhood patrols through a group that mobilized in 2013 to defend the neighborhood of Ponte di property-related crimes, justifying its initiative largely through the existence of a nearby Roma camp, which is called in Italy Campo Nomadi, in fact, one of the largest in Rome and in Italy. Now, at the time when I met the group, interviewed the leader and accompanied them on a number of patrols during the night, the phenomenon was still relatively new to the European continental scene. In their current form, neighborhood watch and neighborhood patrols have been known in the UK since roughly the 60s. But although forms of community policing have been known in the past and have actually preceded the establishment of the state police, there was a comment about that yesterday in the chat, I believe. The institutionalization of the monopoly of policing by the state has meant the decline of informal policing to virtually its complete disappearance. However, there is nowadays a clear recrudescence of informal policing starting roughly since 2010 in Europe. And this is why it's also very important to apply a historical analysis to the phenomenon to avoid saying that it's a completely new thing, and to link it to past practices. Now, ethnographic research remains relatively scarce in neighborhood patrols in Europe. I've conducted such research with this group in Rome, pictured here, and then following their decision to shut their doors to me, I have continued to follow their public Facebook page, conducting digital ethnography on the content that they share, and linking it in my analysis to their practices that I have observed through participant observation. Now, for the argument that I'm making in this paper, I have complemented my ethnographic data from Rome with articles from the online media in the Netherlands and Germany, as well as the accompanying readers' comments. I am currently carrying out discourse analysis on this material. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, my ethnographic fieldwork could not take place. Martijn has already spoke a little bit about my project. Because I have discovered very important correlations between the texture of the urban space and practices of informal policing, I am specifically focusing on the role of urban space in the emergence of these groups in the Netherlands and Germany. So this is the focal theoretical point of my analysis, complemented as well by the question of how we can theorize through these practices the nexus between security, space, and the state. And so in this paper, in these three contexts, I analyze how these practices of informal policing work ambiguously to craft the state and to shape space in particular ways. So just to give an idea about the extent of the phenomenon. In the Netherlands, between 2012 and 2016, the number of neighborhood patrols called Burgerwacht has multiplied by 5, reaching over 700 such groups, and these are data from 2016. So in the meantime, the number has multiplied more. In Germany, the figures remain vague, but many articles claim that the police is worried about the increasing numbers of such groups, which are called in German Bürgerwehr. In 2016, for example, an online article claimed that there were 30 such groups, but that one of them had a Facebook page counting over 14,000 likes. That same article had about 25 pages worth of comments when copied in Word format from the internet. And many comments had been deleted from the conversation. So the topic is really receiving attention and controversies arise around it. Another article commented that in a town of only 50,000 inhabitants, and one not particularly plagued by high crime rates, that there were already 3 such groups active. In Italy, the security package of 2009, which is a set of security laws that dealt, among other things, with urban security and public order, has regulated what is called voluntary surveillance, thereby also prescribing it, of course, as a desirable form of what they call participatory security. While the phenomenon was still virtually absent in the Italian landscape immediately following the security laws of 2009, and many people actually complained about it, not complained, but noticed that, the law was a flop. The phenomenon suddenly started growing in the last years with incredible strength since 2017, when the online media was publicizing almost on a weekly basis the appearance of such new groups all over the country. And that happened right when I came back from my last batch of fieldwork. So I wasn't able to delve further into the multiplication of these patrols in Italy. In 2014, the European Neighborhood Watch Association has federated gathering associations from about 20 countries in Europe. In each of these countries, the neighborhood watch programs are being praised for being effective at reducing crime levels and publicized with the aim of extending them. All in all, informal policing is a growing phenomenon returning on the European scene. And the reason why I'm talking about neighborhood watch programs, which do not take a very active form of patrolling the streets, obviously, is because I also talk about these practices under the umbrella of informal policing. And because it's a very important element that allows me to theorize the link with the state. Now, these forms of informal policing amount to space-making practices aiming at shaping urban borders corresponding to spatial divisions marked by class and race, sanitizing the urban space and purging it of the presence of undesirables. The Roman group that I have followed reshaped the space of their neighborhood materially and visually. Materially, through their patrolling practices, privileging certain areas and certain objectives to be protected, specifically middle-class areas and the condominiums and shops belonging to this class. In their patrols, they reshaped the neighborhood in practice composed of a middle-class area built in 2002 and an older, lower-class area called Ponte di Nuova Vecchia, by excluding the latter from their usual night patrolling routes, except for the purpose of showing guests like me what urban blight and social and moral decay looks like. Also, their insistence on shops and condominiums uncovered what was deemed worthy of protection. Visually, they reshaped the neighborhood through their very presence at night, the militaristic logo on their cars, which I think was visible here in their logo. But also their practices of sharing content on the social media. Now, such practices create a community based in fear and insecurity, which, by commenting on the photographs and videos shared, weave a common narrative shaping the neighborhood through ideas of safety, unsafety, which then circulate and are multiplied. And I've written about this extensively. But the group also reshaped urban space discursively by linking tropes of urban blight on the material dimension and the undesirable presence of immigrants in the urban space as disturbing. And of course, the Roma have a prominent place in that kind of hierarchies. On the visual dimension, to the moral decay of the Italian civilized nation and to the inability of the state in granting protection to its own citizens. Now, needless to say, of course, the framework in which these discourses take shape is staunchly nativist. And the group in Rome has tight links with the far-right Casa movement, whose members attend the protests organized on a yearly basis by the group against the presence of the nearby Roma camp, and in general against the policy of campi nomadi in Italy. Now, this is very interesting visually as well, because the type of font that appears on this banner has been called in Italy the fascio font, meaning it is the go-to font that is used by far-right in far-right materials. So these practices are obviously space-making practices, but they are also state-making. Now, I want to bring these dimensions together, materiality, visuality, sociality also, and discourse in one thread, following how security practices and discourses make and unmake the state in particular ways, in the space between the urban, the global, and the abstractly national. And because my focus is on space and the connection between urban space and the emergence of these groups, I delved into the space-related literature in the anthropology of security. So people like Seth Allo and Zoltan Gluck were very interesting to take into my theoretical analysis. Now, if they have argued, for example, that the spatial scales at which security, and I quote, the spatial scales at which security formations and power are organized are crucial for the anthropological study of security, I want to analytically separate the spatial scales, the really spatial scales of the neighborhood, the city, the province, or the region, and the global space, from the abstractly national space, which I take to be rather ideatic than spatial. So rather than seeing the state as a container for what takes place at lower scales, following the literature on the anthropology of the state, I split the state into its idea and its institutions, following Abrams, and arguing that the spatial conception of the state does not sit well with the discourses in which it is being mobilized to justify practices of informal policing in the urban space. The state in its ideatic avatar is not inconsequential to these practices. Quite to the contrary, it is central to them, being mobilized as their very raison d'être. This move of despecializing the state theoretically reveals how security practices which take place in the urban space, in fact, make and unmake the state on both dimensions, idea and institutions. On the one hand, they produce, reproduce, and circulate the idea of the state as an incapable protector in need of support from, or outright replacement by, its citizens, and in this sense, they make the state as a weak state. But in the same move, they also delegitimize the state precisely by portraying it as incapable of protection. And in the sense, they unmake the state. But this is not the entire picture. Now, taking a look at what happens at the intersection between formal policing and practices of informal policing, specifically at the police response to such practices, one can grasp the uneasiness of the state, this time in its institutional dimension, to allow for the processes of making and unmaking that are pressed upon it. In fact, in all three countries that I'm talking about, the police often manifests uneasiness at the idea of neighborhood patrols, and there have been cases in which they have prohibited or at least publicly discouraged such practices, while at the same time actively participating in the extension and propagation of neighborhood watch programs as a more passive form of self-protection, or rather vigilance, in which citizens groups may engage. In Italy, for instance, the Neighborhood Watch program, Controllo del Vicinato, Control of the Neighborhood, is privately promoted by the commander of a provincial unit of the military police, the Carabinieri, who gifted me this book. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah. He gifted me this book when I interviewed him. And he explained to me that he's very eager to promote this program because he sees this as a possible activity that he can carry out after he retires. And also he has a master's degree in criminology. So it's really, really interesting how these ideas circulate in the institutional environment. So on the other hand, in this sense, the state as institution, notably here, through the institution of the police, is being made in a double move. Discursively, its purported weakness is rejected. They say there is no need for neighborhood patrols since they have everything under control. And in practice, its control on the population is being capillarized through the governmentalities of watchfulness, as Daniel Goldstein calls this, that the police promotes through neighborhood watch schemes. With regards to my own research in Ponte di Nona, however, this is a little different as the neighborhood patrol cooperates with and openly praises and supports a local police unit. However, this police unit is an unusual one. It was set up in 2010 as one of the measures undertaken by the Alemanno administration to evict informal camps of nomads. Now, this unit called the SPE, which would be something like public and emergency security, can in fact be seen as a racial police unit because it was set up with the intent of policing the Roma. The word nomad was in fact at the beginning of the activity of this group in its title, but then as the police unit changed its name, this has completely disappeared. Now, the anti-gypsist discourses and practices of the neighborhood patrol and the racial policing practices of the police unit complement each other. In fact, when the new administration elected in Rome in 2016 announced that it was planning to move the SPE and entrusted with a different mission, the neighborhood patrol mobilized to support the unit by organizing protests and widely publicizing its arguments for the maintenance of the unit to repress the nomads. Now, in my visualization of the theoretical framework of the space and state nexus in informal policing, the state as an idea becomes a sort of skewer cutting through spatial scales which are then pressed together in compounded layers. For instance, the global scale becomes pressed together, as it were, with the local when practices of informal policing revolve around the presence of refugees or people thought to be immigrants, and patrols police their presence in the neighborhood while deploring immigration policies perceived as too lax. The regional scale merges with the local when neighborhood patrols emerge in areas in which certain political ideologies have greater purchase and intersect with their discourses, like it is the case in northern Italy, where there is greater support for the Lega North. And there is a historical penchant for organizing patrols, the so-called ronde, which were actually historically the groups that led to the emergence of fascism. Or like it is the case in Germany, where the eastern part is taken to be a hotbed for anti-immigrationist views. The local scale, in turn, merges with preceding scales when insufficient urban investment leads to what is perceived as urban blight, inevitably accompanied by ideas and discourses of social and moral decay, when urban policies lead to gentrification or degentrification, which I have been able to observe in Rome, or when neighborhoods are shaped in ways accruing insecurity through particular architectures negotiated between political power and the economic elite of constructors. As I have also found in the neighborhood of Ponte di Nona in the periphery of Rome, just to illustrate, here, for example, constructors with powerful links to the national political elite have negotiated with the municipality of Rome the maximization of the inhabitable areas to the detriment of public space. Unsurprisingly, the lack of public spaces where people could socialize in the neighborhood has been found to correlate positively with a sense of spatial insecurity, as well as with far-right voting behavior in the Roman peripheries. With citizens taking things in their own hands, as this trope is very, very recurrent, when it comes to protection, it would seem that the state is indeed shrinking and retreating. Of course, a common trope in analysis of neoliberalism. But as I have been arguing, I think that instead of retreating, the state as institution is in fact extending its governmentalities of security through the capitalization of its function of protection through neighborhood watch schemes. Framed in Italy as security at zero cost, they reverberate with neoliberal ideas of the efficient use of resources and of the mobilization of people through schemes of active citizenship. Indeed, another way in which neighborhood watch programs have been described as is a rediscovered civic sense. But in the process, the state is also struggling against its own unmaking, both as institution and as idea, when the practices and discourses of neighborhood patrols delegitimize it, claiming it has become or it has been made too weak to protect its citizens. So these spatialized grassroots security practices, which I have subsumed under the umbrella term of informal policing, work ambiguously in crafting the state and in shaping its contours. Now, I find it really telling that the papers on Europe were gathered in one panel here, and perhaps this speaks to our imagination about global North and global South and what they mean. Neighborhood patrols and the legitimizing discourses on which they fare signal the appearance on the European stage of the weak state. What does it mean when the weak state, a concept often used to impose Western models of administration onto the global South, is suddenly smuggled into Europe through these practices? When European states are produced from within, as it were, as weak states themselves. Very tellingly, ideas of the weak state in Europe are often accompanied by tropes of colonial conquest masked as defense, or as a venture into a sort of Wild West. In Italy and Germany, for instance, many critiques to neighborhood patrols and civilian defense groups, in particular those coming from state actors like the police or governmental actors, call their members sheriffs. Sorry, I missed a slide that I found to be visually very interesting because it's a division of weak states, apparently, in the world. And so, yeah, these neighborhood patrols or civilian defense groups are very often called sheriffs. To conclude, practices of vigilance manifested in informal policing are simultaneously and ambivalently state unmaking, with the un between brackets, practices that draw upon colonial imaginaries. Vigilant citizens delegitimize the state precisely by portraying it as incapable of protection, and in this sense they unmake the state, importing from the imaginaries of the non-Western post-colony a failed, weak state. And of course, I'm drawing upon the work of Jean and John Comerell. In response, state institutions generally discourage such practices while producing a colonial imaginary of Wild West sheriffs, incompatible with modern European state-regulated public life. Instead, they actively participate in the extension and propagation of neighborhood watch programs as a more passive and less state-threatening form of vigilance. In the process, state control is being replaced in capillary ways through the governmentalities of watchfulness, again drawing on Daniel Goldstein, that the police actively promotes through neighborhood watch schemes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna, for a very insightful presentation, but also already a kind of a comment on how we framed this panel, and also I think a very rightful questioning of when we group things together, what do we actually mean by that, and now what might be the possible unintended consequences of such groupings together. So I think this is very much food for thought and discussions, which we will have in a moment. Nevertheless, I want to take just 1 second. I saw that in the chat there's also parallel. There has been a lively exchange of how we deal with questions of language and diversity, or let's say diversity and the way we speak about it. And I want to thank the contributors for signaling it also. And if I read them, I think there's a genuine interest of all people here to do this together and to make sure that we learn from each other the way we actually use language in these kinds of encounters. And I wholeheartedly would like to take up one of the invitations to keep on doing this, not just in this conference, but also in the AnthroCrime network and beyond to make sure that we create the environments that we think are appropriate to all people involved. So thank you very much. This is by no means bracketing of that. I think we can continue it, but because we are also in the middle of a panel, I would like to continue that discussion. And the discussion will be led by, will be started by Erol Saglam, who's our discussant. He's also the co-convener of this conference, of this workshop. Erol is a social anthropologist working on the reconfigurations of statecraft and its relation to the law and the changing parameters of political subjectivity. And he's interested in conspiracy theories, societal violence, amongst other things. He has earned his PhD degree in 2017 in Birkbeck University in London, and is, among other things, has been a postdoctoral fellow at Stockholm University. So I think this is the right moment to give you the screen, Erol. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Lively, I was like really illustrating examples, I will say. And then one of the objectives, of course, is to situate vigilante practices as we started. And the Anna's critique, I would say, how we frame it in Europe is super pertinent. I completely agree in a sense. And then in somehow, I feel that you have some kind of objection because there seems to be different directions of streams that like these can be lumped together in a sense. I completely agree in a sense because, you know, when I was trying to bring together all the papers and the arguments, I also feel like one is always sticking out. Almost, you know, there's always some kind of, they don't always come together, even though they are geographically super close or sometimes like overlapping. There seems to be something different in a sense, in always one case. But in maybe like I just start with the common threads, and then, you know, I quite like the way they bring forward, you know, the or bring gender and sexuality to the fore first. In Kristina's case, it's always like, you know, how the vigilantism itself is creating this kind of gendered bodies. Man or Dinko is like, you know, super hyper Putin-like, I would say. He's also like riding the horse bareback a la Putin in a sense. And then I think this is the very imitation of like, you know, a strong man from the almost like the main Slavic country. And this is, of course, in my case as well, I'm also working on like man and vigilantism itself. So I completely understand how this is reverberating across like gender lines. But of course, what's missing in my case is also access to women. And then in your case, and how women, even though they are not like always going to border patrolling, you always see that like how they are surveying the urban space itself, and then how they almost like strive to be as potent as men in a sense. And then how they also, yeah, one of my, of course, like point will come afterwards, but like how they almost like reenact the state in these places, because in the paper we see, you haven't mentioned in the presentation, but I want to bring it to the fore as well, because it's an interesting one. Some women that you like talk to are also like, you know, take photos of the, you know, the immigrants, and then they think that some of them are jihadists or like warriors. And then they contact the Secret Service almost, and then hand these information to them, and then say like, do something. And then when they don't, on the opposite actually, the state Secret Service apparently sometimes following and surveying these very denunciators. So they just like get even frustrated, and it's like the state should do this, not me, but I still have to do it because no one is doing anything. Like quite closely resonating with Anna's aspects, you know, the state is almost like hollowed out in a sense that they are incapacitated, that they fail to perform their own duties. There's like some kind of an image of a state that is failing, which is we ascribe not so closely with the European idea. No? Just like, you know, the state itself should be super present, omnipresent everywhere, and then also like the social life itself should be regulated by the state institutions and norms. But in Kristina's case, there's like a really strong anxiety, I feel, while reading your piece. I was just thinking, you know, the very desire, almost like burning desire by men and women to have the state intervene in their lives almost, but it's absent. It's like ostentatiously absent, I would say. There's like a striking gap where it should be. And then this is quite, you know, the interesting, because almost I feel like from all the dialogues that they were feeling almost like the anxiety whether the state actually exists or not, because they are contacting the whole of the institutions and nothing comes forward almost. So they just see what's happening, and no one knows what's happening. And then they see that there are infiltrations by jihadists, the warriors. These are not refugees, they are saying in a sense. So there's conventional aspects of the vigilantism, but some social body, and then the border itself is transgressed. So I can understand this, but I'm more interested in how the women are operating in public space, how they use paranoia and suspicion and rumor itself. Teams that I'm also interested as well. That's why I think they are super productive. How they pass on this information, not to also the state authorities, but also to one another, that circulate a sense of threat. This of course becomes more and more concrete, and then they just confront as you said, go to the refugee center to photograph people, and also reproduce this kind of disease-ridden alien bodies. They are really toxic in a sense. They threaten our mores, but also our bodies themselves in a sense. And then I was just thinking, this is completely resonating with my experience in the Turkish case, when ultra-nationalist conspiratorial communities were also saying, Israel or the US is always poisoning our food and fruits with the genetically modified products to weaken our bodies, not only our mores or something. It's in Arab countries, the conspiracy was that in Arab countries it's done by the injection of homosexuality. In Turkey, apparently this is not prevalent at all. But in the Turkish case, it's directly targeted, exactly like your thing. There's almost biological danger, really falling in the really direct concrete. It's not even someone is going to come and harass a woman, but it is just they are going to kill us through spreading these diseases as well. And then there's similar concern in Turkey now, by the way. The same conspiratorial, xenophobic, racist logic. And then these rumors and conspiracies also a really productive domain of agency. I'm bringing the whole discussion always to the problem and theorizations of agency as well. But this is how people always approximate political positions. They literally contact as a citizen, as a member of the political community, secret service. You should act. They can demand this almost, and then they demand more presence of the state. This more presence of the state is also what Anna was also saying. It's just the state is not there, but someone should feel the vacuum. They are patrolling the streets as if they are the state. And then I completely agree with you in the sense that this is also a historic shift. The state is delegating these responsibilities, duties to civilian actors. In the same case in Turkey, I would say, the people engage in shootouts with guerrillas and terrorists before the arrival of the state forces. And sometimes they say terrorists are shooting, keep the police away, because if there's an engagement fire exchange or something, then we will do it. Police shouldn't get engaged in these kind of things. We are here almost they are the real force, and then this is national body itself, and the state has zero almost cost, as you said. It's a low cost policing, and an army and security maintenance. Everything is your duty now, and the state doesn't have to do anything other than just validating or legitimizing. As you said, legal structure has been changed in a sense. It has been permissible now to do these things in a sense. In Turkey, there was I'm comparing it just because it resonates super well with my experience, but I'm sure Denise wants to say something because she's exactly working on these the urban space and the vigilantism itself. But in my case, I see how the political alignments are the same and how they reproduce the very idea of the state is really something that is important, hijacked, flowed out, but at the same time can be reproduced, almost reenacted, rebrought to the public space through civilian endeavors. But here I want to ask, because you are using this unmaking and then unwritten parentheses, of course, and then you say that this is also unmaking. But unmaking, in a sense, it's quite secondary. When I listen to you, I was just thinking, what's unmade here? Almost the effect is there. Of course, the institutional withdrawal is there. I understand that they are cost cutting, or not enough provisions for services. But at the same time, the effect is there. Although the very securitization of the alien bodies, and then xenophobic discourses, moral community, like borders are all reproduced, but at the same time, something it just goes on almost. There's a continuity without a rupture, but the institutions have rolled back actually. And what's done made there exactly? But I was like, maybe it's made more. I was just thinking, maybe there's again, super similar to Kristina's articulation. Maybe yours is also like demanding more space. No? Police should be in these neighborhoods because there's crime. There's like urban plight. You said, that some people are falling into poverty. And then lower classness shouldn't be part of like Italianness. No? It's like an alien experience. It should be an alien experience in like lots of people's perceptions. Exactly like the Kristina's case as well. It shouldn't be their concern almost. Like, this is not their way of life. This is like Europe almost. But there's something almost. It doesn't hold, of course. The argument itself is like flowed from the very beginning, but it just I don't know. It is in operation. It still appeals to people. There's this kind of, this is why conspiracies and rumors are important, because through this circulation they create this very effect itself, even though they don't hold up water almost. They are not smooth, coherent accounts, but they, through their like nonsense almost, or like the non-compliance with reality or truth, they still bring together all these kind of like people and then force them or orient them to act in a certain way. There is this kind of, I really found them productive. And then I think Vincenzo is a bit, is a really different strand in a sense, because he's reconfiguring mafia organizations as like a Vigilante endeavors, and then he has these two moral, like the contestations. One is like a transgender trans woman, I would say. But that's why, in any case, the comments came quite pertinently, because I was just going to say, why are we not addressing her as her, she? Is there like a specific concern that like she identifies as like a he? Or because, when you say transsexual, and then I don't know, the object, like the subject starts as a he, it's obvious, and then works as like apparently a woman, and then as a sex worker. And then this is of course contentious, and it just like played out in the comments and chat quite like usefully, I would say. This was one of my objections, to be honest. And second, of course, when you formulate mafia as a like vigilante organization, what is the boundary? What is the analytic, like, I don't know, productive gain here? What are we gaining through reconfiguring or rethinking mafia as a like a vigilante organization? I understand that they are reinstituting like the moral borders, but in the paper, like in the presentation, and the paper also has like a discrepancy, I have to say, because in the paper it's so obvious that they have, it's not only a supply of security provision, that the mafia is intervening through the demand of the like the community itself. But in the presentation, you specified explicitly that even without like the demand and consent or invitation of the community, the Cosa Nostra is intervening there, because I was just thinking the consent, the cultivation of consent from the very community was part and parcel of this kind of the vigilante endeavors of like the Cosa Nostra. In the paper, it made sense because this maybe could have been the point through which mafia and vigilantism could be separated and differentiated, because mafia is in a conventional sense is a completely extra legal organization that doesn't have to have like some kind of legitimacy. But in vigilantism, there's like this kind of like a tension itself. And then when people seek out directly Cosa Nostra to intervene on behalf of the young woman who was impregnated but not wedded, almost the moral like the process itself unveils, but in a really weird way. And then there we can talk about how the organization itself is instituting itself as a guardian of the moral boundaries, in case someone breaches these, of course, and then they punish them. There's a sanction. But at the same time, of course, as you said, like the transgender subject's role is like a super important. Like the trans woman is tolerated in a sense, It's like and then you say this is a conservative neighborhood normally. Trans woman sex worker should be like a bit like an aberration, but she is tolerated more than the the violent attacks. So you are saying the negotiations, and then I think this brings me to the Ahmet Moradi's discussion yesterday, how like the very vigilante endeavors always takes like place in the local setting, and how they take these socialities into account, and how they are not independent, just like the super abstract circulations or enactments. They have to renegotiate their relations within concrete settings. I don't know if I have time, but I think
we should move to the discussion, Erol.
Okay.
I'm not sure how much. Maybe
Okay.
should we do that, because I'm afraid otherwise there won't be time to hear. But then, if
Thank you.
there's time, you be the first one to appear. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah, of course, please.
So maybe I could give the floor now to the presenters to comment or to respond to Erol's questions and reflections. Please bear in mind that there are other people also who would like to ask questions. So I would say take about 3-4 minutes. And of course, then we might continue the discussion if there's still time. So Kristina, please, can I ask you first?
Of course, thank you, Erol, for the very insightful feedback and reflection. In my talk, I mainly discussed one woman organizer of these protests, while I also interviewed 2 other women who've organized protests and who've organized their own kind of investigative missions. And what Erol was referring to was my written presentation, which also reflected on another woman. She is in her 40s, and what she was able to identify Facebook profiles, 3 different Facebook profiles, when she went in a internet cafe in Harmony. So as she went there, one of her students who owns the cafe, the internet cafe, told her that the person who had just left their kind of login details open, and so they were able to go into that and to these Facebook profiles, and they identified what I'm told is that 3 different profiles of the same person, one of which contained a man having a Kalashnikov. Okay, so that's what she referred. This is what she understands as a combat unit. So this is a combat unit, a jihadist who is in the camp in Harmony and who lives there. And she also has told me that she has seen these combat units that she identifies in other cities also around Harmony. So this is the way that she found out in relation to the question, how do women kind of find that information even though they don't do the border patrols? It usually in the narratives that they told me, it happens either accidentally, that they were driving their car in town and they saw a group of men, or they saw a queue of people trying to withdraw cash, or through the word of mouth, so that they have witnesses. They kind of have this. They know they have this kind of networks. They're part of it. They speak with people. People tell them. So this is very informal, and often they also take photos of their kind of discoveries that they come across. And publicize them on their newly created group, which is the Initiative Committee for Harmony. It has a Facebook page. Another mode in which they kind of investigate, and that's how they frame it, is through just searching for immigration policies and interpreting them. So they're just research how much funding there is for the refugee reception in Bulgaria, or they'll just come across, okay, there is a Dublin system which says that wherever the person is registered, they will then return back. So they interpret this by that according to the Dublin system will be overflowed or invaded by all these migrants that once will come back at some point. So they interpret also policies and documents, and they do that from their position of being a lawyer or a public figure or like highly educated woman who speaks and interprets for people who would not be able to do that. And I also wanted to say one thing that you mentioned about their desire to kind of have the state, or to have the state to kind of bring it, that they brought in the state agency for national security to come in. They really want to take that role. And the way I've thought about it, reflecting on the conversations and the ethnography, is through the notion of heroism. So similarly to the border vigilantes like Dinku, who were discussed as national heroes, like actually perceived as the national heroes, I think that the women also see themselves as heroes, and they kind of aspire to national liberation heroes in Bulgaria, and they really see themselves as this kind of modern hero, kind of fighting for the nation, this active citizen. I think that.
By the way, Kristina just passed her Viva apparently, so congratulations.
Wow.
Not the Viva I just submitted.
Okay, still congratulations.
Still, congrats, parabéns.
Thank you.
So that brings us to Vincenzo. Would you like to respond to the questions and comments by Erol?
Well, I mean, probably, Erol got the points. It's a different perspective for sure, because Cosa Nostra usually has been depicted as an organization working hand in glove with prominent politicians, working hand in glove with entrepreneurs, and it is. This is the peculiarity of Sicilian Mafia, unlike the Camorra and the 'Ndrangheta. This time we find out that the consent is built on the territory, on a local basis. In Mount Sinai, because they carry on the attempt of maintaining the social order. Again, acting extra-legally, wielding social control. What is the relation? I mean, is a matter, again, yeah, for sure, Cosa Nostra pursues the interest of maintaining social order and wielding social control on its own behalf, but there is indeed a demand. I mean, both in the first case and in the second case, all the actors involved expected Cosa Nostra, the Sicilian Mafia, to intervene, because this is the way usually relations are not manipulated. Relations are built, are developed. Of course, like in the case of the state, the state is the extrema ratio. Even in this case, Cosa Nostra intervenes when the situation is about to degenerate, and there are expectations from the public for this to happen. I mean, why? Yeah, indeed, Cosa Nostra has always been manipulating such typical values as family, as friendship, as honor, to build its own power upon it. But on the other hand, they are also part of Sicilian society. So partly they believe in it, but they also find at the same time it convenient to reinforce, to reproduce these values in order to maintain their power, to expand their power. And then, yes, this flexibility, this attempt, again, apologies if I might have misunderstood. So from what I'll take up Agata's suggestion, if that is fine, and use the transgender word. Is that okay? Is that fine for you, Martin, for the moderators?
I think that is fine if you use
Okay.
transgender.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I'm open for discussion, but yes.
Yeah. I mean, again, I have already apologized online in the chat about this misunderstanding, which was meant by any chance to offend or to be disrespectful of anyone here and outside here. And I think Elith understood it, and hopefully also Agatha did. So yeah, they don't look specifically, again, at the typical representation. They, of course, try to negotiate the maintenance of values in relation to what is the dominant mood of the person, of the public. So, in a way, this recalls, if we like, a similar pattern of vigilantism, such as the one, for example, that happens or that happened in the United States, when you had the lynchings of minorities, of African Americans mainly. And then also, for example, in New Orleans, there were a few cases of lynching of immigrants, of Sicilian immigrants, because the mood was that of the population to be so, and this mood encouraged the enacting of this kind of practice, and in a way this explains, also explains why, at least Cosa Nostra in Sicily, I mean, I just stay in my domain, I don't speak about Calabria and Campania. Why is a diehard organization? Because insofar as they keep having this kind of consent for regulating this sort of micro context-based social relations, it will be sort of hard to uproot. Then, of course, it's a I agree that it might not be real, because the bulk of Cosa Nostra's affair is a bit higher than that. But this is the reason why, one of the important reasons why the Sicilian Mafia is a diehard one, their group, because they built this kind of consent also through vigilantism. They take care, they interpret the moods of the public. They are ready to catch, also because they are strongly grassrooted in the context. They are not external, so they are ready to catch the dynamics.
Yeah,
what's going on, the possible transformation. Hopefully I was clear enough and I provided.
Yeah, I think so. If not, we continue after the last presenter has had a chance to respond. Anna, would you care to respond to Erol's question? Thank you, Vincenzo.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Erol. So the question was about this making unmaking thing, right? I mean, I think I might have fallen prey to the sort of temptation to use catchy words in the title, you know, and sort of unmaking with the un between brackets is, of course, a very, very facile thing to do. This doesn't encompass, of course, a rigorous theoretical analysis, and the idea was that this analysis was supposed to take place after the comparative ethnography, which I haven't carried out for the very obvious reasons of the pandemic, right? So I am sure that there are better concepts out there. But what I really meant was that, you know, such practices basically unmake the state in two particular ways. The first one is that they take over the monopoly of violence, or at least they attempt to. They do not do it till the end, obviously, but this is the sort of dynamic that is started by these practices. And the second way in which the unmaking of the state is being done is through the fact that they emphasize the absence of the state. And now the very interesting conundrum that I find here is that, of course, you know, the state does not exist. I mean, in a very anthropological sense, right? The state does not exist. So I find it very important to be very, very sharp conceptually when we use the state in our analysis. What do we actually mean? And this is why I was talking about the state as institutions on the one side and the state as idea on the other side, right? And then on the other hand, the making of the state, I was trying to emphasize the productivity and the kind of agency that these practices have in making, on the institutional side of the state, giving way to certain dynamics of promotion of these neighborhood watch programs as a sort of more acceptable, citizen responsible practice by the police and the state in general. But on the other hand, also, what is the productivity of the idea of a failed state? So what I meant was that they make the state as a particular kind of state, which is the failed, the weak state that we are all very familiar with when it comes to discourses on the global south, but we hadn't been familiar with when it comes to the global north, right? And so the interesting question is, what is that going to do to our conception of the state? Exactly, precisely in the neoliberal era in which we talk about, also theoretically, right? We talk about the retrenchment of the state and so forth. So, but this is work in progress, and I'm sure after I get more material and hopefully also get to the ethnographic part, in which I'm also, I need to talk to police and in the particular locations that I will choose, which I think this is work that is going to continue.
Luckily so. Thanks, Anna. I would like to give the floor to first to Professor Björgård and then to Denise. Please, for those who respond, we have about 15 minutes left. So please try to be a bit concise in answering, so there's room possibly for more questions. Professor Björgård, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Just a comment to Ada's fascinating presentation. I think it's an important topic you brought up about kind of the tension between the neighborhood watch types of groups that are sponsored or supported, recognized by the police, and the vigilant types that are not. And there is something in between there as well. We have in Norway, and I think that the main issue here is whether they challenge the states or the police monopoly on violence or legitimate use of force or not. We have in Norway and in Sweden, for example, also groups like the so-called night ravens, or in Sweden they have the granddaddies on town, which are kind of recognized group. They work in tandem with the police. They are sponsored in Norway by insurance company, and I've been out with them on some occasions, and they are briefed by the police at the start of the patrol. And the idea is that on Saturday and Friday and Saturday nights, the full town center is full of teenagers and adults who are often drunk and no sober adults available. So they want to bring in sober adults. And quite often these are elderly people, parents, and people who are not at all threatening in any ways. They should not intervene. They should report to the police. And when then the soldiers of Odin came, they said that we want to be a kind of night ravens, but a kind of in our own way. We have more respect than those because we are stronger and tougher, and we have a kind of, although we are not permitted to intervene, we can deter, and of course we will intervene if it's necessary. And that was not acceptable to the police, and they said clearly that this is we do not want them there, and they gradually started to use police law to stop them and ban their activities, mainly because they challenge the monopoly of the legitimate use of force, or at least a display of the potential use of force. And I think that makes a big difference. I think that range or that tension between these two varieties are quite interesting.
Thanks a lot. You want to quickly respond, Anna, or you take it as a comment? Or
Yeah, thank you very much for that comment. I would like to add something. I think there are also hybrid forms that are emerging at the moment and that are really interesting. And it might be an attempt of the police to sort of hijack or bring back these vigilante initiatives. For example, in Austria, there is an initiative by the police to train and to set up these patrols, and under the concept of Sicherheitsbürger. So, it's the security citizen has appeared as a very ambiguous and very interesting form, which is at the same time a citizen, but under the umbrella of the police, with the training and the support of the police, with certain, paraphernalia that show where they belong. I don't know if they're paid or not. I think they are paid, but a very, very small amount of money, which is also very interesting in terms of, the criticism that there is not enough funding for the state to carry out the monopoly of violence in a proper form and to protect its citizens. So it's very interesting to see all the range of these forms of watchfulness and vigilance.
thank you.